Hello. For the convenience of this project and interview, please state your name and your occupation in the Navy during the Vietnam War.
Okay, my name is Alan Hight, and I was a petty officer, second class radioman in the United States Navy.
So where did you grow up?
Where did I grow up? In northeastern Massachusetts.
So how did you end up on Cape Cod?
I ended up on Cape Cod after I got out of the service. One of my high school friends had a business down here, and I came down and went into business with him. That's how I ended up here. Then I married the girl next door, and I've been here for 48 years.
Why the military?
Why the military? Why the military? Well, basically, I did not have a choice, other than I could have gone to college, which wasn't something that was going to happen for me. So I received my draft notice at when I turned 19, and a month later they decided that they had their quota for the month, and they didn't need me. But I knew that if I was on the bottom of the list that time, I would be at the top of the list the next month. So I went down and joined the Navy rather than going in the Army.
Describe your happiest memory from the war.
My happiest memory, well, I should say getting released, but gee, I don't know how to answer that exactly. I had some really good times. I met some really good friends while I was in. I guess that was probably just the camaraderie and the people that I met.
Was there anyone that you had a really strong bond with?
Well, yes, actually, there was a guy that when I went to radio school, he and I were buddies, and he was from North Carolina, and we got to be really good friends through that whole period of time. And then when he got sent to the subservice over in Groton, Connecticut, and I was sent to overseas the other way. And he went up and he actually stayed with my parents periodically when he had time off, rather than go all the way back to North Carolina. He'd zip up and stay over at my folks' house for a time. So it was really nice.
Do you still keep in touch with him?
I have up until the last couple of years, but then he passed away, so
I'm so sorry.
I lost him. But that's all right. He's good.
What was your proudest moment?
My proudest moment? Proudest moment. Well, I guess it was when during the service, you're saying, right? Yeah, okay. My proudest moment was probably when I made my second class petty officer rank. It was a lot of work, and
what did you start in, like when you first went into the Navy?
when I first went in, my rank at that time was Seaman Apprentice. And then I made Seaman, and then I made Petty Officer third class, and then I made Petty Officer second class.
Describe your darkest memory from the war.
I can't say that I really have a dark moment. I didn't. It's not the same as being inland and whatever. There's always sad moments when we lost our pilots and lost, people while we were over there, but it wasn't any real dark moment that I could think of offhand.
What was the most difficult decision you had to make while serving?
Most difficult decisions? Oh, well, it was my time on Guam was my difficult decision time because I was in charge of a whole group of people, and we had to make certain decisions on how communications were handled, and that was where it was. It wasn't a big decision, unfortunately.
What was your like daily life while you were serving, like on the ship?
What was my daily life like? Well, the first ship I spent my time when we were going over to Vietnam from San Francisco. We had general quarters every time you turn around, which was called battle stations, and they had drills day and night, off and on, off and on. We got over there. We were put on a rotation of 12 hours on, 12 hours off. So you slept or had your food 12 hours, and you worked in your job 12 hours. And you went to, the mess hall was open 24 hours a day, so you could get your meal whenever you felt like, or whenever you had the time to do it. At one point they served us sea rations, which are a little box of canned food and stuff, and the dates on them were 1944. They were older than I was. And we survived on that for about a week. They using up the old stores from that. My ship was that old. It was built in 1941. So.
What did you miss most about civilian life while you were serving?
I guess it was basically freedom, being able to do what I wanted to do to a degree when I wanted to do it, and somewhat anonymity, I guess, because you were crowded on a vessel and you just didn't have any private time per se to yourself. It's just,
How did you communicate with friends and family at home while you were at war?
Writing letters. That was it. I received weekly letters, family letters from my grandmother. She typed letters and sent them to all of my brother and myself and my parents and my whatever, so we knew what was happening with the whole family at all the time. And that was it. We couldn't really call home or do any of that. So.
How did your family react when you told them that you were going to war?
Well, they were not happy. My father was not happy at all. He was in World War II, in the Battle of the Bulge, and all through Germany and Czechoslovakia and down in that area. So he was not happy to hear that I was going in the service, because he just didn't want me to have to go through the same thing he did. And my mother, well, mothers don't like their sons being in danger or possible, so.
So if your son or daughter wanted to enlist in the military, how would you feel?
Well, I would feel it was I wouldn't be terribly happy, but I would respect their decision, because they obviously would give it a lot of thought. In this particular, because it's all voluntary now, it's not like you had to do it. So they made a voluntary decision. They would make a voluntary decision to do it, and I would support them.
Describe your living conditions.
All right. Well, on the first ship, the living conditions were not good. Like I said, the thing was built in 1941, I believe, and we had 30 guys living in a room slightly bigger than this, 3 high and in racks, strung with rope on, in canvas, and then a little mattress, fans, maybe 4 or 5 fans, no air conditioning for our living quarters. The food was great. They fed us quite well. My working conditions were better because I was a radioman and they were all in air-conditioned units. So that was worthwhile. But when you came out of there, you were back, and the temperatures could easily be 100 degrees over there, and that was so.
So you said that you served in a lot of different places.
Yes.
So what was the most interesting places that you served in?
That I served or visited?
While you were serving?
Oh, while I was serving, okay. I went to, let's see, went to the Philippine Islands, Hong Kong, Japan, Guam, San Diego, San Francisco. Basically, I think I enjoyed Japan the most. The food was great. The country was nice, clean. The people were polite, and whatever. Hong Kong was totally different. It was a British colony at the time. Wasn't and you had a definite division between the English population and the Chinese population, and so you had to be a little careful. You basically never went into the Chinese section. Wasn't safe even during that time.
What did you do in your off time when you were on the ship?
My off time on the ship, I slept, I ate, we played cards, chess, listened to music. That was about it. And we just.
Was there anything that you had to do on the ship that was just a huge adjustment from your regular life?
That I had to adjust to? No, I don't think so, really. I mean, it was just like any service situation. You had to do what you were told. You had jobs you had to do. They weren't always fun, like cleaning the bathrooms and doing the making coffee, but you had laundry and all that other things. It was pretty much learning to live independently, but in a, I don't know how to say it, in a group situation. You couldn't, you weren't like by yourself. You had to, everybody counted on everybody else to get things done.
Who was the most influential person you met during your time serving?
Well, I don't think I had a particular one, I'm sorry to say. I really didn't. Nothing there really influenced me personally.
So how long were you on the ship?
Okay, I was on the first ship, which was off of Vietnam. I was on for a year. And then I was stationed on Guam for 16 months. I went into school in between, into radio school, electronics school. Then I was sent to Guam, which was a major relay station, meaning that ships out to sea would send their messages into us, and we would send it to whoever their addressees were from there. And then I was from there I went to a destroyer tender, which meant we went from port to port, like in the Philippines or Japan or whatever, and our vessel repaired a class of ship called a destroyer and submarines. They tied up alongside and they repaired or fixed anything that needed to be fixed on the ship. And I was still in the communications department, so I just answered messages and sent messages.
Was it hard adjusting to the different crews on the different ship?
Yes. You always had a whole new whole new batch of superior people that you had to please. um, Whole new bunch of guys. It would be like you going to a different school, and having a whole new classroom of people that you didn't have a clue who they were. You just didn't know. You never went in groups. We always went. You were the only one going there or there. So it was hard to adjust, adjusting between people.
And what was your least favorite aspect of your specific job?
I'm sorry, that's a tough one because there really wasn't. I basically enjoyed every part of it. No, that was basically, I say one time we had my last ship, we had an admiral on board for a while. That meant everything had to be spit and polished. You had to wear dress uniforms rather than your dungarees, and to do your same job you did, the week before. And I guess that wasn't really distasteful, but it was just something that was out of the ordinary, and it made your job harder.
What was your favorite aspect?
Like I said, I think it was basically, meeting the people I met. I mean, and lived with, and they were just. Everybody was a separate individual. They came from different parts of the country, and you gleaned a lot of, respect for, different areas of the country and how they were like you or different than you, and sort of gave you a well-rounded education into what the United States was like.
What was the environment like in Vietnam?
My environment was hot and sticky, humid, and even though we were out to sea all the time, it was still, that was basically the most, what I remember the most about it was you just were never comfortable. It was always just hot and humid and whatever.
How did you feel when you were coming back from war?
Well, that was interesting because they basically told us that as soon as we could change into our civilian clothes to do it, because the atmosphere of the people of the United States at that time wasn't, I wouldn't say the majority of them, but an awful lot of them were against the war, and they basically took it out on us, and it wasn't our fault. We didn't choose necessarily to go there and do that. And so,
how has the military changed your life?
How has it? Well, I think it made you grow up. I think it gave me discipline, the ability to follow through and do a job and complete a job, and make the decisions I have to make that do day-to-day life.
What was the biggest challenge returning to civilian life?
Well, I guess it was basically having to learn how to do everything by yourself. When you were in the service, they told you when you ate, they told you when you needed a haircut, they told you this. They just, everything was regimented as to what you did. And then after that, you had to say, well, geez, I have to find lodging, I have to find a job, I have to find, So.
If you could choose a word to describe your time serving, what would it be?
A word? I think it would basically be educational. For me, it was a life lesson. 4 years of life lesson.
How has your view of war changed as a result of your service? How has your view of war changed as a result of your service?
Well, I'm sorry, I don't think we need war anymore. I think they should be able to handle it with words and actions, not fighting. It's just not right. I wish there was a way they could all get along and, have a peaceful world.
If you hadn't gone into the Navy, what would the war be in your mind? Like, how would you think of the war if you weren't in it?
If I hadn't gone in the Navy,
how would you think of the war?
That's a tough. I really don't know how I'd feel. I'd like to say I would support, that the decisions that the country's leaders needed to do, but I can't say that I would have or not, depending.
Did you see any fighting while you were on the ship?
No, did not. Other than, no, the closest I came was having some of our planes return with all sorts of bullet holes in them and stuff like that. People wounded, pilots wounded and from being shot at the ground, but not, no real, other than we could see in the distance, you could see the bombs going off at the big flashes like a thunderstorm in the, in the distance or something like that, lightning.
If you had a choice of what branch of military to go into today, which one would you go into?
I think I'd still go in the Navy. I still like that. I like being out to sea. I like to.
What experience from your service affects you most today?
What experience affects me the most?
Today.
I'm sorry, I can't think of a particular thing at the moment.
Okay. What advice would you give a young person of thinking of entering the military?
Well, I would say basically give it a lot of thought, weigh your options, and your reasons for going in the military. If you going in because you need direction in life and whatever, I would say that's a reasonable reason to go in.
If you didn't go into the service, what profession would you have been?
If I hadn't have gone in, I would probably be a banker. That's what I was doing when I got in.
What were the most challenging weather conditions you faced?
Basically, storms at sea with the ship. We went through typhoons and had waves breaking over our bow, which is like 100 feet up the tall, and just rain basically, and then had some snow in Japan one time, northern part, but other than that, nothing.
How did the difference in climate affect you?
Not really too much. You get used to it after a while. It was different from here for sure. Japan was actually about the same because they were on the same latitude if you go across. But South Vietnam and whatever was basically hot and humid, and it was not fun.
Define a hero. Define a hero.
Define a hero. Mm. One who does selfless acts for another, I guess.
How old were you when you entered the Navy and when you left the Navy?
Okay, I was 19 and a half when I went in, and I was 23 and a half when I came out.
Would you consider yourself a hero?
Not necessarily, no.
Why?
Why? I was never put in a position where I had to act to do something that definitely affected others directly.
What was the most important aspect of your job?
Most important was that messages that came in, or messages that were either came in from another ship and had to be sent to where they were going, you had to make sure that they got there. Making sure you communicated with another vessel to have his messages to get them. And make sure they got delivered, because that meant life and death situations at times.
What was the most dangerous or challenging aspect of your occupation?
Challenging was basically challenging was communicating with the ships at sea, because you were doing it over radio waves, and you had constant interference from keeping you from getting messages. You had to be diligent, and you knew they were out there by themselves, and you needed to you were their link to the rest of the world, and it was important to do that, and that was just a constant challenge.
How did your time serving affect your personal relationships?
I didn't have any when I was in the service. There was no time for any personal relationships. As far as girlfriends or whatever, we just didn't have time. It was just not a time. When I got out, I was already 23 and a half. Which, and we didn't do, I missed the whole Woodstock and the whole whatever, all that stuff was just, I was serving during that time, and I didn't.
What was the longest time you went without coming home?
Longest time I went was, well, I guess I'd have to say it was when I was on Guam. That was 16 months.
How long were you in Vietnam for?
A year. From September of 66 to about September of 67, just about a year.
Of all the places that you served in, which would be the most stressful environment?
I would say it was on that first ship was probably the most stressful, because you were constantly concerned about the enemy at the time. They would send their junks, which were boats, out with munitions on them and try to ram you and blow you up. So you constantly you knew people were watching for that, obviously, but you always had that worry that it could be a mine, it could be who knows what, it would